Hey everybody, Happy New Year. Welcome back to The House List. My name is Peter Agostin. I am your host. This is my weekly podcast. We're here. Here we are, the first podcast of 2017, the first episode of The House List. We're still at it. Feeling good about things, feeling great about things. And here we are, episode 15. Not that I'm going to count off every episode as they go by, but I think 15 is one of those early milestones. And this is the first time where I'm doing a two-part interview. So I feel great about that. I think it's a great way to kick off the year. Michelle Cable is my guest on today's podcast. If you caught our first installment, it was a great conversation. If you didn't have a chance to check it out yet, and you're just catching this one, after you're done listening to this one, go back. It's the episode right before this. Michelle Cable, booking agent, manager, owner and operator of Panache Booking, which originated as Panache Magazine in Humboldt County, California. In the first episode, we talked about the origins of Panache, the humble beginnings in Northern California, in Humboldt County, which is where I met Michelle for the first time. I was going to college at Humboldt State University. I got a degree, my undergrad there, in journalism. I actually got a double major in journalism and public relations. So that's kind of what I finally did my schooling in, although I had been writing for magazines for probably 10 years before I finished college. I started contributing to magazines in maybe 1995 in Herb magazine, but that's a whole nother story, and we'll get there eventually. So that first episode was great. It got a big response with my old friends and colleagues and musicians from Humboldt. So if you are one of those folks who checked it out, I definitely appreciate it, and I hope that you enjoyed it. This portion of our conversation I did with Michelle, which was recorded in early December over the course of 2 days. She was staying back here in New York to do basically to clean out her old office in New York, because she's now based in Los Angeles. So we talk about basically our conversation for this second part is talking about really the second wave of Panache Booking when Michelle moved to New York City. Excuse me. I was working as the talent buyer or the booker for the Knitting Factory, a music venue that's since closed and reopened. But when I was the booker there, it was probably from 2007 to its closing at the very end of 2009, something like that. Or maybe I started 2006 and it closed at the end of 2008. Actually, that's what it was. And actually, Michelle was played a part in me landing that job. When that club closed, that location of it, which was on Leonard Street in Lower Manhattan, in Tribeca, I hit up Michelle and I said, listen, I want to go a different direction with my career with this. I'd like to start working as a booking agent. Would you be willing to let me come over there and start working as an agent? I was a talent buyer for a period of time. Now I would like to try my hand at being an agent. I'd worked with booking agents for many years leading up to that, both before and during my time at the Knitting Factory. And she was down. So I took a job first to tour manage a tour with a group called Themselves. And I spent, part of the year going from city to city, driving and settling and loading in and out, but more importantly, meeting a bunch of promoters and talent buyers, which I would then, form. A lot of them I still work with to this day. Some of them have stopped working in that field. But when I got back from that tour, I started with Michelle at Panache and followed it into all of its locations in New York because we bounced around offices a few different times. It's always in Brooklyn. It's always in either Greenpoint or Williamsburg. From 2009 until 2012, and then I moved over to Inland Empire touring. So we talk about that time, and we talk about some specific artists from that time and some of her accomplishments. We also talk about some kind of pretty serious stuff. We both with Michelle and with myself and with Jonathan Tobin, DJ Jonathan Tobin, who Michelle has been since been his booking agent, as we all kind of share this. We've all had very traumatic near-death experiences while being on the road, basically. And we talk about that. Michelle and I talk about that. We don't really talk about mine because that's not really something I always talk about. And since I have this platform, eventually we'll dip in it here and there. But Michelle was in a very bad accident while on tour with one of her bands, and one of the early Panache bands, DMBQ. And we had to talk about Jonathan's accident while he was in Portland on tour, sleeping in his bed in a hotel. A wayward taxi drove through the wall and pinned him to the opposing wall of the room while he was still in bed. I myself was on tour with a band called Bassdrum of Death. We were in northern Brazil and my kidneys failed. And then I somehow made it back to New York, quite barely, and spent 3 weeks in the hospital. Two of that, or at least a week of that was in ICU. And I had a transplant a year ago. But that's a whole other story. So in a way, Michelle, Jonathan, and myself can share in this thing. Michelle's accident absolutely changed her life, and we go into that. We talk about it. And she handles it all, and even then, up to now, with so much grace, and she's just she makes something that's so serious seem so manageable, even though that's not the word I'm looking for. But it's just plays to her personality. She's incredibly calm in the midst of a crisis, and I always enjoy that aspect of working with her. She keeps sort of her direction going in a positive light, and is capable of really overcoming a lot of stuff. And so I don't want to go or ruminate on that for too long, because it's important that I want to get into this conversation. I think I've prefaced this enough. I thought I'd talk a little bit about 2017, but we're like 1 or 2 days into it, so I have your guess is as good as mine at this point in time. And who am I to tell you what's going to happen or what to think, or even my opinion is forming and changing with every moment, So we'll allow that to be that for now. But again, I want to thank you guys for tuning in to The House List, my weekly podcast. This is the first episode of 2017. And without further ado, check out my part 2 conversation with booking agent, manager, my good friend, and a great human being, Michelle Cable. Check it out. My battery. No, I brought my Walkman. So, and I bought new batteries.
Battery's dead.
No, I think I got two bars on this. Okay, so we're officially picking up where we left off. Obviously, we covered. We couldn't cover everything I wanted to talk about in the first hour, so I wanted to. You were gracious enough to allow me to come back here and do another hour with you, at least another hour, hopefully 3. And so I wanted to, we spent a whole lot of time talking about Humboldt and San Francisco. So I figured to approach this kind of second part of it, I wanted to talk about, the last half of the Panache era leading up to this point. Now, if everything goes as planned, this will be my first episode of the new year. So this will be the first week of 2017 that this particular conversation is going to air. So what do you think about that?
Great way to start the new year.
Yeah, precisely. I hope so. And what a year it has been, right? This past year.
Yeah, it's been an insane year, 2016. It's time for some new stuff to happen, new exciting, inspiring things in 2017. But I think everyone's ready to wrap this year up.
How far are you into 2017 work-wise right now?
All the way. Depending on the artist, I've pretty much mapped out schedules and itineraries for a few artists through December 2017.
Right. So,
think ahead in this industry, especially with like booking and management, you have to plan 12 or 14 months ahead.
Right. Now, do you find that like some artists are particularly ready, willing, and able and capable of thinking that far ahead, and are and the inverse of that, is it harder for some artists to kind of be able to wrap their heads around planning? Now I know this all depends on if they got a manager, what the management situation is like, what the label relationship may be, if they have a label or not. Like, how is that a challenge for you, like getting people to plan that far in advance too?
Yeah, I think it depends on the artist, but definitely I think a lot of musicians I work with aren't used to planning that far ahead, but then sort of through, like having conversations and training them to try to be more organized, it's worked. I mean, definitely a lot of the people I work with now, I met when they were in their early 20s and didn't have cell phones, and now they have cell phones and are a lot easier to get a hold of, and also, and it's developing a relationship of trust with that person where you can kind of map out their lives really, and they trust you to kind of make the best decisions for them even that far in advance. And I think once you develop a relationship with someone and there is that sort of like good communication and established trust, it's a lot easier to get people to organize things that far in advance, because they are putting like faith in you to just pick the right thing for them. Right.
And after a certain amount of years and tours and shows working with particular artists, like you fall into a certain rhythm of familiarity, and you're like, yeah, like, we know what to expect. We know the trajectory of what a tour will be like. There's a lot less, I want to talk about basically the New York era and the LA era of Panache. Now that just sprung to mind because when I first started working at Panache, I don't think either one of us, particularly me, I was still warming up to being able to work that far in advance. And I mean, I acclimated to it very quickly, I think. But, the artists I was working with, it was new for most of them. So as I'm sure it was sort of with, you had already been doing full national tours for a while leading up to that, because I started in 2009. So do you remember sort of like where your head was at, like when I kind of came on board, and like where was Panache at? It was basically the spring of 2009 is when I started. Do you remember that time?
That was when I was living in a loft, right?
Yeah, you were living in a loft not far from here, because we're in Greenpoint right now. So you were living in a loft with a couple of dudes, a big loft, and we were working out of your kitchen, sitting on bar stools on a long like bar basically, and then you had that big screen TV. you know you remember?
Yeah, I remember there was a really old school giant TV and an amazingly huge loft, and then the tiniest IKEA couch ever. It looked like something out of Honey, I Shrunk the Kids in this massive loft. But yes, so I remember that era of, it was a couple of people, you and Jesse, my first employee, working, out of this Northern Greenpoint old box company. Like it was, they manufactured boxes, but then it also doubled as like a Panache office and an office for a label. as well out there. But yeah, that was an interesting time because I think I was booking a lot of New York bands, getting really into doing like CMJ. I think I had recently just taken on working with like bands like the Slits and the Homosexuals.
Right. And I want to break down that roster a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, and I was still working with a lot of bands that had, some of them I'd moved from San Francisco. I mean, when I moved from San Francisco to New York, they were on the roster, but, artists like Blowfly, the Slits, Monotonics, and I believe right when you started working there, that's also when I started working with Ty Segall.
Well, I started working with Ty Segall first.
That is true. Well, I booked his first tour.
Right. Oh, and then you
took over because a lot of
that's true. I apologize, Ty.
A lot of, because at Panache, it's my agency, and I'm training these agents to take on other artists to kind of expand the roster, and so a lot of the bands that we would take on, I'd book a first tour for them, but then it was with the intention of somebody else at the agency working with those artists. And Ty, at that time, was one of them because Ty had never had an agent before, and he was touring like solo, and he got on tour with the OCs at that time. But that was kind of the roster, a very eclectic roster. I mean, Chain of the Gang, Calvin Johnson and his band, a lot of Jonathan. I just started working with DJ Jonathan Tobin like earlier that year, I believe, too.
Right.
And doing his soul parties. But yeah, it was a very interesting time. Lots of great things happening.
So I want to kind of break down a couple of the bands, and if you can sort of remember one thing or some defining moment from one of them, or something, just because that was a really definitive time for Panache, and that like there was you started forging a bigger presence at like things like South by Southwest and CMJ with these kind of big showcase parties and stuff, as well as really developing these showcase style shows in New York and the tours in general. So can I just like regale you with some names really quick, and then you like can, because they were, I think, set the foundation for where the company is at now, which is a little different than where it was when me, Jesse Hodges, Devin McManus, and I think that was the staff for a while, and Annie, of course.
Yeah, and Annie Southworth.
So really quickly too, so Annie was another booking agent at that time too for Panache, right?
Yeah, Annie had just started working with Panache as well, and had brought over bands like the OCs, who I'd been friends with for a long time too. But Annie was an old friend of mine from San Francisco who I had worked with or met through just hanging out at various bars in the Bay Area. And around the same time that you came over to Panache, she was leaving an agency that she'd worked at for a long time and brought most of her roster over to Panache as well, and that included bands like the OCs and
Slim Cessna's Auto Club.
Yeah, Slim Cessna, and eventually a lot of other bands.
Yeah, she had like a pretty interesting, unique roster in herself. One of the at that time, I think one of the most notable bands for sure was Monotonics, who like made a crazy impact like in a relatively short period of time. Mm-hmm. Like, how did you work with those dudes? Because they were, a lot of people like focus on them, and then they just suddenly stopped playing, right? So what's the story with that band?
So, I mean, I think Panache is known for working with a lot of bands that have, they're good musicians and really talented and have amazing albums, but the live show is kind of where it's at. And especially on the early days, I worked with a lot of really insanely captivating and like kind of daredevil acts, like and Monotonics I started working with at that time, and I'd already worked with a band called DMBQ from Japan who used to crowd surf their drummer. They'd light the drum kit on fire, and then I'd met these guys, 3 guys from Israel who also did similar things, but I'd met them when they toured the States, only doing a few shows with the band Silver Jews.
That's right, there was a connection with
Yeah, and I met them in the Bay Area when I lived there through David Berman's Silver Jews, and that was just an interesting combination too. And I think David in interviews has said that taking a band like Monotonics, which is very different sounding than the Silver Jews, on tour just seemed like the wrong thing to do, and that's kind of why he did it, which I always thought was fascinating too. But I met them at one of their shows in the Bay Area, and ended up talking to them, and they joined the roster, and that did kind of change the arc of where Panache was going, because they developed such a crazy cult following and kind of grew from playing to like 20 or 30 people.
Where were they from again?
they're from Tel Aviv.
Right.
And they started playing to like 20 or 30 people in like warehouses, but then quickly grew to playing to 800 or 900 or 1,000 people. And we're kind of one of those bands that, similar to me being really close to, there are certain bands on the roster that I've toured around a lot with, and just naturally by being on the road with a band, they kind of impact your entire like, you know, like life and you know, and the career of the agency. But Monotonics became one of those bands that I started to see all over nationally, and I even went to Israel and visited them over there.
Wow.
But
how was that?
Oh, it was amazing. It was really beautiful. I went on a soul tour with DJ Jonathan Tobin to Israel and for a 10-day period.
Wow.
Yeah, Jonathan from Monotonics helped me book that. It was pretty crazy.
How many? It was just shows in Israel?
We did 6. I think we did 6 shows in Israel. Jonathan DJ'd. We did a soul clap in Jerusalem, which was very interesting because a friend of ours, took over the mic and ended up just speaking in Hebrew the whole time, and Jonathan didn't know what was going on. And but Jonathan also opened up for Faith No More in Tel Aviv.
That's right.
And MGMT when we were there, and I think Madonna was traveling around Israel at the same time. And but yeah, I mean, like, so, but Monotonics were this band that kind of just blew up, and you know, they did a lot of interesting stuff. They played a variety of festivals. They went on that FYF bus tour that Sean Carlson organized, and with Matt and Kim, and you know, and they kind of just became this legendary cult band, and it was all about seeing them live because they would, you know, crowd surf the drummer. They would take the garbage cans from around the club and throw those on top of the drummer, or like you'd be watching the band and then have like garbage cans bouncing around in the air, you know, crowd surfing garbage cans, and you know, and they would, and they got wild, and you know, and it was kind of, you know, like the singer would climb. He was kind of like this amazingly fit acrobat of sorts, and would climb up onto the rafters, which is interesting now because someone I work with, you know, Mac DeMarco, also does similar things. Right. And but Ami was in his 40s and was kind of like this fitness guru, very similar to Richard Simmons. He kind of looked like Richard Simmons too, and so it was. But he was a very crazy, insane frontman, and they kind of developed this legacy for their live show. And then 2.5 years in or 3 years in, they just kind of stopped really abruptly, like on tour. And but then in the wake of that ending of their career, or you know, they took a break and all ended up doing other stuff. I mean, 2 of them were having babies, and one of them decided to go back to school and then start his own band eventually later. But that was when Ty Segall started becoming more active. And I remember even having a conversation with Monotonics because, you know, these artists they become like family, and especially at a company like Panache, we get really attached and, you know, and connected when you work this closely with people. Where I remember when they were breaking up, they were trying to make sure that I would be okay as an agency, and they were like, well, you got Ty. he'll keep you active. And I was like, no, I'll be fine, you know. And then Ty, I think at that point too, that really was a notable time for Ty, where Ty's career kind of took off, and you know, and from Monotonics to Ty being somebody who was very active and kind of
definitely
and kind of defined and shaped a lot of where Panache went, and you know, and we kind of took this journey together.
Yeah, I want to talk about Ty because he's been such a big character of the story for so long. And during the brief period of time that I was his agent was during Lemons, that album he did, Lemons, which is I feel like one of his greatest records in my humble opinion. But obviously he's still very active, extremely active, and sort of set a precedent for like a constant way of touring, and only because he was also such an integral part of that period of time in Panache. I don't want to jump ahead too far because I do want to go back to some of these more of that era. But just, you know, if you can talk about Ty too, just in how his career has evolved and stuff during the period of time that you started booking him again after when I faded into the rearview mirror. It's playing.
Well, after Peter booked a tour for Ty, I ended up working with Ty again directly as his like main agent, and you know, that was right around the time I believe Melted was coming out, and it was interesting because Ty just kind of started to come into his own. He kind of really started to embrace being a performer and, became a more confident performer. And it was, and as his songs and his style of writing developed and his live show developed, I think he also was coming into really feeling confident as a performer. And, I think a lot of that had to do with, conversations that me and him would have about, expectations of what we wanted to do together and kind of just getting along so well and kind of this trust that allowed him to let me push his boundaries.
Right.
So, I mean, and a lot of the bands I work with that, have grown and are still on the roster are bands that started out playing to like 20 or 30 people in these little warehouses, making $100 or $200 a night, and maybe never saw themselves growing out of those smaller like venues. And, but then, we kind of decided to challenge those expectations a bit. And, instead of always just playing the same, club, like maybe, instead of playing just Death by Audio, which is a club I love that used to exist in Brooklyn, to try to do Mercury Lounge.
Sure.
And then go to Bowery Ballroom or Music Hall
Right.
Williamsburg, which then, became Webster Hall and,
Right.
and grew. And, and some other artists, it became Terminal 5 or in the future Radio City Music Hall. And like, but doing it in a way where it's comfortable to them and, us. I mean, I remember the first time Ty played Webster Hall, it was a huge, milestone in his career and my career, I think, to sell out this club.
Right. I was at that show.
Yeah, that show was amazing. And a lot of people, I think, remember it because it was the first time Ty had headlined. We put together a bill that felt like a mini festival. It was the Men from Brooklyn, the Strange Boys from Texas, and White Fence, from like the Bay Area and LA, and Ty. And, such a insanely strong, amazing bill. But, I think with the combined strength of all those artists together, we sold out that club like 4 or 5 years ago. And, and I think it was really exciting, kind of made waves, to amongst other cities, not just in New York. And that was, cool and something that we didn't really know how that would go, but we kind of thought, I thought that it would work out, and it did, fortunately, and stuff. And it was such an amazing show to be part of, and everyone felt this really like collective energy at that show. And, and in similar ways, it's like we've made decisions together of like, well, let's go after this or try to do this differently, or, and always be creative, but also kind of aim for the stars, but in a way that's like comfortable, where you're staying true to yourself as an artist.
Well, I think all of his different formations and the solo acoustic stuff, because he's had a bunch of different kinds of bands too, with different lineups, like that's been a pretty brilliant way to stay creative and different, but totally stay active. And it works in certain formations or certain bands like Fuzz, or his thing with White Fence, or the
Dogs.
And the Togas.
Yeah, the Togas.
I still have my Togas t-shirt.
But yeah, I mean, I feel like a lot of people, I mean, anyone who's been a fan of Ty's, even if you just kind of caught on in the last few years, you start to realize that he does do a lot of conceptual things, and you have to kind of really stay on top of it. And there are these moments in time and these kind of like time capsules of his career. Like, that Sleeper band, the acoustic record he did for Sleeper album, he only did like 30 or 40 shows worldwide in that incarnation. And, and most of those songs don't really come up in the rest of his sets, except for when he plays solo acoustic. And it's, and so it's, you feel special when you kind of see these moments in his career. And even, his more recent project with the Muggers band, that we were joking about it the other day, where he created this character named Schlappo that, when he was wearing this baby mask.
That's the mask, right?
Yeah, and he was whipping people with an umbilical cord. And the timeline of that project was actually 9 months, which we were joking was kind of like the term of a pregnancy.
Huh, right.
And, but I mean, it keeps everyone on their toes. And I think the most important thing is it keeps Ty inspired and interested in what he's doing. And it keeps me, like constantly always getting to do something different or new. And it's challenging because we will try to put Ty in different rooms or, mix it up. And it's kind of this ever evolving, like path of his with music. And I think he's putting out a record soon in early 2017, which is maybe when you're listening to this.
Right.
And that record I'm really excited about because I think it's the perfect amalgamation of the last several albums of his all wrapped up.
Is there a
into
title
one.
yet? No sharing that. No sharing.
Yeah, check it out. It's on Drag City.
Cool. Another one that I would love to know about, if you have one memory of like working with this guy, Blowfly, like what would that be, and when did you first start booking him? Because he's obviously a completely unique character, not bound by any particular genre, but also has a storied musical history.
Yeah, so Blowfly, I was recently talking about Blowfly to a few people that didn't know who he was, but I worked with Blowfly for 6 or 7 years, and Blowfly is this songwriter, an amazing rapper who also went by the name Clarence Reed, which was more of his like clean soul act.
Right.
And Clarence in the 70s wrote a lot of songs for bands like Casey and the Sunshine Band, and he apparently he was the person responsible. I don't know if this is totally true, but according to him, he told Question Mark from Question Mark and the Mysterians that it should be 96 tears instead of 69 tears because originally it was supposed to be 69 tears.
Really?
And but he had an amazing influence and wrote a lot of songs back in the 70s and 80s for these like contemporary like soul singers of that time. But he also had this alter ego where he was this like really risque, dirty rapper where he would take songs like Otis Redding's Sitting on the Dock of the Bay and turning into Shitting on the Dock of the Bay. And or like he had another song, instead of it being Whole Man, WHOLE, it was Whole Man, HOLE.
Right.
And Jingle Bell Rock became Jingle Bell Cock. And there's if you look him up, which you should if you don't know who I'm talking about, it's amazing. And he had all these albums in the 70s that were like called The Weird World of Blowfly, where it was just dirty rap and like soul and funk. And he was somebody who kind of had these two very, very separate career paths that a lot of Clarence Reed fans maybe didn't know about Blowfly.
Sure.
And he somehow managed to have this kind of like Jekyll and Hyde personality. But I met him after he'd kind of like retired doing the clean Clarence Reed soul stuff and was mostly like performing as Blowfly. And his career kind of been revitalized by his manager at the time. And I believe I interviewed him in Panache. It was like 9 years ago. That's how I met him. I interviewed him and put him on the cover. And it was the first issue that came out in New York. And I'm remembering incorrectly. So I interviewed him 11 years ago, and it was the last issue that came out in San Francisco. And I put him on the cover. And I remember interviewing him and running out of tape because I did a 2-hour interview with him.
Right.
Very similar to our interview. But I mean, Clarence Blowfly, I remember him singing raps to me about, my genitals and other perverse things. He would rap dirty about me for like 20 minutes in the interview. I need to find this tape. But,
right.
And he was a very, very, very sweet man who had so many amazing stories about.
He was cool, right? Like you guys were friends.
We like kind of fell in love with each other, and he was so charming. I think at this point he was like in his 60s when we were talking, but I did this interview, put him on the cover of Panache, and then his manager kind of hit me up and was like, hey, we need a booking agent. Would you want to do it? And I ended up working with Blowfly and his manager Tom for the next like 6 or 7 years. Which led to a lot of other there's other interesting things around that too. But, and Blowfly, he toured, I booked him all over North America, but he did tour the world at that time. And unfortunately, Clarence passed away.
Yeah.
Recently in the last like year. And,
right.
And, it was very sad because he was just one of these people that had such a generous heart and soul, but also is a very classic story of somebody who had made a lot of desperate decisions in the earlier part of his career and ended up later on in his life not being able to really take care of himself. He sold a lot of the rights to most of his original songs to other people for various reasons because he needed money. And if he had held on to those, you know, like the masters and the ownership rights, he would have been in a much better place. But, you know, like, and that's true for a lot of different musicians in the past. But it was one of those things where I was trying to really help him get his career restarted. And it was such a special time to be part of the last decade of his life.
Right. How did you start working with RTX, and which is Royal Trucks and Black Bananas, but it's really Jennifer and you really started the working relationship together. Do you remember? So that's been for quite a while too.
Yeah, I think Jennifer Harima from Royal Trucks, which became RTX and then became RATX, and then became Black Bananas, and now she's back doing Royal Trucks with Neil Haggerty.
Which is amazing.
I met her, I mean, I think just around...
She's incredible.
Yeah, I think maybe I put her on a show, and then me and her ended up talking and hanging out, and she's an amazing front woman, incredible personality. Like, but I think she's probably been one of the people that's been on the Panache roster the longest.
Yeah. In
all these different formations, you know, but I remember putting her on bills at like Glasslands in Brooklyn and a lot of different places. But yeah, I mean like we've worked with her through the last 10 decades, the last decade of her career as well. But I don't remember exact story of how we met, but I think it was just through shows and mutual friends.
You know, another group that had an amazing woman front person was the Slits, which I would love to talk about because you did some incredible shows of theirs, some of their last. You know, how did Ari Up was the leader of that group? What was the story with that?
Yeah, I met Ari Up when I was still living in San Francisco. This is probably Panache era, like 12 or 13 years ago, and I think she met me through someone else I'd worked with too, but she was given my contact. I think she actually, it's funny, I was probably like 22 at the time, 23 at the time, but I think she thought I was a lot older than I was, and then she finally met me in New York at CMJ and was really surprised that I was so young. But she had reformed the Slits with some of the original members and some new blood, and we did their first tour in like a couple of decades, I believe, and that culminated at CMJ, and it was, and being a fan of that band for so long, I was you know, very affected by being able to be part of that whole reunion tour too. But there was, I mean, the one show I really remember that stands out is this show that I did with Todd P., who I know you interviewed on your podcast recently, but we had a show around CMJ that was in a Todd P. warehouse. Todd and I used to do a lot of shows in various like warehouses and art spaces in Brooklyn. And the day of the show, and it was freezing outside too, because it was like November, I think it was early November around CMJ, and the venue got shut down, which is, if you went to Brooklyn shows, like Brooklyn Todd P. Panache shows back then, that was a pretty common thing where it might get shut down and then moved. But this show got moved 3 times.
Wow. In
like a day, because we moved it to another venue, and then we put it on at this venue, and then an entire SWAT team of police showed up and shut it down. And I remember one of the police officers coming in and shutting it down and finding out who was playing and being like, "What? The Slits are playing?"
Really?
I wish I could like not have to shut this down and stay for the show. But so we had to find another venue after already having moved it once and putting up signs all over the subways. We had to move it to a third venue, and I believe Erasarada was playing the show too. But we moved it to a third location. And the craziest part of this was that Ari was amazing performer, but also very stubborn. And I was very concerned about her just wanting to throw in the towel and not play the show at all. Right. Because she would just be waiting in the green room in this cold warehouse, waiting for the show to happen. But I remember having to go up to her and tell her, "Okay, we're moving this once again, but it'll be fine." And her actually just, really going along with it and like, being like, "All right, let's do this," and getting in. I told her there was a limo outside, even though it was just like a black, like gypsy cab. Huh. But we drove her to this third warehouse, and they played for like an hour and a half for like 2 hours.
I remember that show.
But it was pretty classic, like warehouse stuff, but we still got like, I think it was like 600 or 700 people out to this other place. But dealing with RA in that period of time was, I was so young too, and had never really worked with somebody with such an intense personality too. I learned a lot from that whole experience, just kind of the way to kind of make someone comfortable and get them to trust you, even though you're in, staring in the face of like a very disastrous situation where already the cops have shut down your venue.
Right.
It's been moved twice. And, but it worked out. And I think a lot of people that were there felt like they were part of something special. But I did that one tour for them, and then they kind of stopped touring.
Right. Oh, okay.
I think they did like maybe a few more dates afterwards. And then RA passed away a few years ago too, which RIP. Yeah. RA as well, because she was an amazing, brilliant, and strong woman.
A star, if there ever was one. What's up with the Raincoats, just for a sec, because they're coming back, right?
Yes. So the Raincoats are another band that I worked with after they had been inactive for many years. And I actually haven't booked a show for the Raincoats in like 7 or 8 years. But they recently just did a couple of shows in the UK. But they're going to be active in 2017, which is really exciting. And there's a book coming out about them and some other new stuff along the way.
Amazing. I just wanted to know, because they were a part of that early wave of panache bands when I was there. And obviously I'm not going to sit here and ask you about every single one of the ones as we gaze on this long list I have. But there are two more from this period of time. One is Quintron and Miss Pussycat, and then I did want to talk a little bit about DMBQ, because I feel like they were like the cornerstone of panache for quite a while. But Quintron and Miss Pussycat is such an unusual group too, that also, like, I guess in a way, like, there is a sort of underlying theme in that you've worked with not only like challenging artists as far as artistically, that are sort of pushing the envelope creatively, but that there comes some very personal relationships that come out of this, with people passing away, people being dealing with sickness, and all sort of wanting to continue playing shows and performing and doing what they do best. And I think the story of Quintron and Miss Pussycat is a pretty powerful one too, because Quintron went through some shit and then still kind of came out the other side, playing shows and stuff. Like now I don't know the full story at all, and we don't necessarily have to really go too deep with it, but I just want to talk about your relationship booking them, because they're another group that aggressively toured a lot,
Yeah, and I was always like, since I was like 17 or 18, I was a fan of Quintron and Miss Pussycat. When I lived in San Francisco, I would go to their shows, and then I think we even tried to interview them in Panache, but it never really happened. And then when I moved to New York and I started working with Jonathan Tobin, he ended up introducing me more directly to them. And we knew each other, but we didn't know each other closely. And we all ended up kind of really bonding and becoming friends. And they were working with another company at the time that they'd worked with for like 15 years. But in that period, they had kind of decided that it might be good to kind of hit the refresh button and try something different, because I think they needed a little more attention, specifically because the types of places they play, it is their whole energy and live show is really reliant on being in the right venue. With most bands, it's like you want to curate the venue, curate the openers, and all that stuff really does depict how well that show will go, how the audience perceives it. And so after like getting to know them for a period of like 6 or 7 months, they approached me about working with them, and we ended up deciding to do it. And I think we both have kind of changed each other's lives, and I think I helped reignite their career in a lot of ways too. But they're such a pleasure to work with, because the live show gets people dancing, and it's so.
For people that don't know what their performance is like, how would you just sort of describe it briefly?
Well, Quintron is like an electrician engineer who has, created a bunch of amazing instruments, but he plays live. He plays like an organ, and has this device called the Drum Buddy that he also created that you should look up, because I probably won't do it justice explaining it. But then his wife, Miss Pussycat, is a puppeteer, and she has, and it changes every tour, but she has designed an entire like puppet mansion castle that she has a puppet show that she performs before they play, and it's like a 10 or 15 minute puppet show. And what's interesting too is that when I was like 19, was stuck in San Francisco listening to some weird radio station, and I started listening to this puppet album that was called Flossie and the Unicorns, and it cracked me up. But I was like 18, 19, not knowing what I was listening to. Turns out years later I find out that was actually Miss Pussycat.
Whoa.
It was her album, and she put out an entire puppet performance album of these characters, Flossie and the Unicorns. But anyways, like, they have a puppet show that her and Quintron do in the beginning, and then they have dancers, and she sings and plays maracas during Quintron's set, and it's like swamp, dance, boogie, zydeco, like really groovy, danceable, cathartic.
Do they still have their little venue that house venue in New Orleans?
They still live. They also booked shows for years at the place that they live called Spellcaster, but that recently, a few years ago, was shut down. The last show that was actually there that was public was a show that I put on with Ty Segall and the OCs at Spellcaster.
Amazing.
And they even had a band of cats perform, I think, at that same show.
Really? Cats
playing instruments. But Spellcaster, they still live there, but it's not open as a venue anymore. But they had a boat bar in the bar, like a bar actually made out of a boat, which is amazing too. But I mean, working with Quintron and Miss Pussycat was really a way for me to be creative, and they inspire me every day, still, like, to this day. But and they were on this cruise festival I did, the Bruise Cruise. They performed on that. But as an example of just how creative I could get with them, like, Quintron and Miss Pussycat performed as Quintron and Miss P, but then Miss Pussycat did a puppet and pancakes breakfast puppet show on the boat in the morning. And then the second year, we even did like a swamp boogie dance party where Quintron had designed little amps out of little styrofoam freezer crates, and had put palm fronds on them and made it. And so it was, but he created like a whole, like, almost like kind of jungle setting that he'd built, and a whole like speaker system out of too. And we did that on the boat and had a dance party, and but it was cool because they were so excited to get really creative and weird on the Bruise Cruise. And it's really fun when you get to work with an artist who is as enthusiastic about a project you're working on and really take it to this next level.
How many Bruise Cruises did you do?
We did 2.
Right.
And which, for those who don't know what the Bruise Cruise is, it was a festival, garage rock festival, on a cruise ship that I did for 2 years, where we pretty much took 500 or 600 garage rockers on a boat, Carnival cruise ship, from Miami to the Bahamas and back. And we had bands like Fucked Up, Black Lips, the OCs, Ty Segall, Quintron, King Khan and the Shrines, Neil Hamburger on the boat. But then we also implemented other aspects of entertainment, like a dating game, or like a puppet show, or we had a bounce dance class.
Right. And you even they did some shows in the Bahamas, right? Yeah,
we did shows on the Bahamas, which was insane as well, organizing events on an island and having to get work permits and all the right, like permits for all the gear to go off the boat, and like that. And then making sure, the scariest part was making sure that we got all 500 or 600 passengers safely back on the boat before the boat takes off.
Seriously.
Because they will leave you behind. And that I organized with one other person, Jonas Stein of Turbo Fruits, for 2 years. And yeah, but that brought so many people together, and maybe one day there'll be another Bruise Cruise. But I kind of ended up changing career paths and stopped doing cruise ship festivals.
Yeah, 2 is plenty, because I was working with you during that time, and I know what a commitment those were. They were very time consuming, very, it was pretty complicated to lease. How would you describe the boats? They're like,
you would rent a block of cabins, but the way that works is whatever you rent or reserve, you have to pay for. And if you don't sell those cabins, you have to, if you don't rent them out, you have to still pay for all the taxes. And the second year when we did it, it was while all this other bad, there was a lot of bad press around cruise ships, because I think there was a Carnival cruise ship that got abandoned by one of the captains. There was another one that got stuck out at sea, and people were stuck in the boat for an extra 3 days. So there was a lot of bad press around cruises at that time, and that did directly affect, I think certain things around like the financial aspect of doing this and trying to sell tickets to people that are kind of already skeptical. But I mean, each year we ended up doing it. It was an amazing, like success in so many ways. And I feel like every day 3 or 4 people still ask me if I'm going to do it again. And I think it really, like in working in the music industry, especially doing it since I was like 15, you learn so many different tasks and qualities that you can later implement in life. And that's definitely helped me in the future, but definitely on that Bruise Cruise or both years of it, running it ourselves, we had no real sponsorship. It was, like something where we just really kind of were running with it. And I learned so much about how to, execute, press, like doing work permits and visas and organizing the safety of 500 to 600 people who really are kind of in your hands for 3 or 4 days. And at that time too, I think a lot of some of the stuff we've talked about is just when you're working in the music or in any industry, but when you're working this closely with a variety of people, you end up dealing with some pretty insane events or, like that are good and bad. And at that same time, in the second year of the Bruise Cruise, that's when Jonathan Tobin, who is also a dear friend of mine, was in this crazy accident.
Right.
And so in the midst of organizing this cruise, I was also helping, a friend of mine who'd been in this kind of crazy, weird freak accident. And
yeah. And I want to talk about that because it was something that happened while he was on tour. And it's something we found out about while we were in the office at Panache. But it also was like, connected in a way to a big event that happened to you, which was your own accident. So just really briefly, the thing with Jonathan, which in the moment, which was I think in 2011 or 12.
Yeah.
I was sitting in the office at Panache on the computer, and my cell phone rang, and it was a Portland number, and I was like, who's calling me from Portland right now? Like, I don't have any. Immediately I looked at the area code, and like I think many booking agents would be like, I don't, the first thing that comes in your mind is like, I don't have a show in Portland tonight. Like, there couldn't be some crisis with one of my bands from a promoter, and it was like a paramedic that somehow got my number and asked me if I knew Jonathan. And I quickly remembered, or I might even looked on the website while I was on the phone with this person. I said, of course I do, yeah. Do you know why he would be in Portland? And I was like, well, and quickly it came to my mind that he had a show at the Doug Fir that night, that you had booked him a show. I'm pretty sure it was at the Doug Fir. It was DJing in Portland. Yeah,
I believe Jonathan he might have been DJing somewhere else, but he was staying at the Jupiter Hotel in Portland. And I think he'd actually DJed a soul party. He was DJing a soul party that night, but he'd gone to Portland early. And, but yeah, then I don't know if you want to continue, or I can continue with what happened, but
maybe what?
But I remember being out for a coffee in the office and out of the office, and then came in, and Peter had a very serious look on his face, and you wanted to talk to me outside, and you had said something had happened to Jonathan, and I had to call, the hospital. And and the crazy thing is that like Jonathan had been in this really like freak accident that a lot of people probably know about, but he was sleeping in a hotel room on the ground floor, and a taxi cab driver had a seizure and pretty much plowed through the glass wall of his hotel room and ran him over, and then stayed on top of him, and he almost died. And Jonathan now is very well and alive and making amazing music and art, and to this day. But it was like such a crazy thing, but what was insane is that no one, like the hotel had his name because that was what was on the registry, but no one knew who to contact, and they just Googled him, and the first thing that came up was our agency.
Right.
And it's one of the reasons why, to this day, I still have our cell phones on the roster agency website, and some of the people that work with me think it's annoying because we get a lot of random phone calls. But thinking back about this now, like if that hadn't been the case, I don't know who they would have gotten a hold of right away, because that was like the first thing that showed up. And because, we're working all the time, we actually answered the phone, or you did because you were there. And we, I was able to like contact his family and friends and all the right people that needed to know what was going on. And Jonathan is somebody he's family to me, and back then me and him were doing a lot of events together, and I traveled, all over the world with him, and had met his parents, and was friends with his girlfriend, and so kind of contacted all the right people that needed to know what was going on, and then just kind of tried to keep it also very private until we figured out what was going on with him. But it was one of the most insanely scary things that I've ever had to deal with. But being someone who has kind of had to deal with so many weird crises, I kind of took action. And then the next several months was a lot of, me being in charge of letting all of his friends and, like a community of people know what the updates were, what was going on, while also organizing benefits with you. We organized a lot of benefits to go towards Jonathan's medical bills because he didn't have, health insurance.
He was just a DJ and artist, like many of our friends that doesn't have any health insurance or didn't at that time.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people don't realize this, but being on tour is, an amazingly fun thing, but it's also a very dangerous thing because you're going from place to place, driving in crazy road conditions. And Jonathan, though, in this situation, when I found out that he was hurt, I thought something had happened late at night or, like out in the street, but he was sleeping in a hotel room and, like checking his email when it happened. So you never know and stuff. But, like fortunately, there's such an amazing collective of people that are always down to help. And a lot of people pulled together to take care of him and also help raise money and just be really supportive and be there for everyone. And what was so insane too is that Jonathan has these long-standing events in New York that are weekly, and his friends and I did our best to keep these weekly DJ nights going by curating DJs every Friday night at Home Sweet Home. His friend Josh Stiles really stepped it up and helped organize these DJ nights so that, because we didn't know how long Jonathan would be recovering, and we didn't want him to come out of being recovering for 6 months and to have these things that he'd been working on for 5 or 6 years no longer exist. And so it was amazing really to see people that hadn't ever really taken on this role step up and really take care of things. And that sort of communal effort, was so inspiring. And I think USA Today did, because this was like global, this entire accident of Jonathan's got global attention. But
yeah, there was a great deal of press around it.
Yeah, I think USA Today did a little piece that brought up Jonathan's accident and what we were all doing, and talked about how that was such an amazing example of like empathy and people pulling together for a good cause.
Oh yeah, and the benefit shows was across the country. There was shows all over.
Yeah, and it was really inspiring, and unfortunately Jonathan was able to get out of the hospital, recover, and was back on his feet DJing pretty quickly, which is so impressive, and just testimony of like his character and like willpower.
Yeah, because he sustained a lot of injuries. I mean, it was a serious accident. It was a freak accident that left a tremendous amount of unanswered questions or just a lot of questions in the moment. I think that's why so many people gravitated towards helping, and the fact that you and I were both working overtime to pull together so many people because he had such history too.
Well, and I think Jonathan's also one of these people that he's organized so many benefits for other people and helped so many of his friends with small and large organized elements of trying to raise money for friends of his, or he's a big philanthropist. And so I think all these people that he's helped over his entire timeline of his life kind of was like, this is the opportunity that I have to give back and help this person that we all love. And it was really inspiring.
I think that that was a big moment for all of us. I mean, Jonathan, of course, and I think for you and for Panache, and but I think especially for you, at least I saw, because you had gone through an accident just a couple of years before, that was terrifying. And it was on tour with a band, and with a band that was like the quintessential Panache group, like the cornerstone of the beginning of Panache as a booking agency. So I know that it's like kind of a sensitive subject, and but I know that you're open to talking about it a little bit. So I wanted to just see if we could talk about it, because it plays such a big part of your company and who you are, and the people around you too. So would you want to kind of, because I saw you the day before, or 2 days before, because you were in New York and then you were on tour, and you did a couple shows and you were on your way to Baltimore, right? So
yeah, so I mean, I'm totally open to talking about it. It's okay. It's been a long time, and I'm comfortable talking about it. But I mean, so
how long ago was this?
I was in a really insane car accident 11 years ago while I was tour managing a Japanese band named DMBQ, who I mentioned earlier, but that stood for Dynamite Masters Blues Quartet from Tokyo. And, one of the things that I went from doing was, running a magazine to booking tours, but then I also tour managed bands. But I didn't drive them around. I actually was kind of more of like their kind of like interpreter almost in a way,
right.
and navigator, and just kind of
guru.
Yeah, tour guru. But it was. I mean, it's insane to think that I would do this for 3 weeks at a time, where I would tour with 4 or 5 Japanese people that didn't speak really much English, and do that across the country for 2 or 3 weeks at a time. And it was great though, because I learned so much about all the clubs I was sending bands to, which I think if you're going to be working in the behind the scenes aspect of the music industry as a booking agent, manager, label, or anything, like, you really should know what it's like to be out there where the band is going, and know what it's like to be on tour, because what you do really is representative of their experience. And so anyways, I would tour with DMBQ, and I toured with them in Japan once, and had toured with them in the States a couple times. And just to backtrack a little bit, DMBQ for me was a band that I met through John from the OCs, because the guitarist in DMBQ was in a band called Hydro Guru that I met in San Francisco. And when and then so with this Japanese guy Shinji, who now plays with, like, the Boredoms, but he formed DMBQ a long time ago, and they were a pretty, like, seminal psych and rock and roll band from Tokyo.
Right.
He contacted me and wanted to come to the States, and when I started working with them in the States, they were the first band that actually kind of got my foot in the door with working with South by Southwest and all these other entities. And they kind of really did help me open the door for Panache's other artists to work with people on a much more, like, a larger level. And I started working with a lot of Japanese psych and noise bands. So it kind of created a real niche for me as an agency back then too. I mean, I think at one point I was working with like 15 Japanese bands.
Whoa.
And I had mentioned before that I had toured with Shellshag in Japan, and everything had culminated for a year of touring in Japan on a tour, and DMBQ were the band that took us on tour. So this all always, like, ties together. But so 11 years ago, I believe it was 2005, in early November, I was on a tour managing DMBQ, and I was only going on like 2/3 of the tour, and it was the last day I was in the van. We were driving from Baltimore to New York to play a Todd P show, and we were in an accident where our van, like 15-passenger van, Ford Econoline van, rolled 3 times across the highway on the New Jersey Turnpike, and it rolled so fast that the van actually was bent in half, like a teepee. And it wasn't our fault. It was during the day. The weather was really clear, but another driver overcorrected and hit the back rear end tire, and like and those types of vans aren't the safest, and the likelihood of them rolling is actually pretty high. And a lot of bands used to tour in these, but now they're safer vans to tour in. But anyways, this girl overcorrected, young girl too. She was like 21 or something, overcorrected and hit our tire, and then we went across all the lanes into a ditch and rolled 3 times, and then pretty much ended up on the other side of the highway. And I don't really remember the process of that whole accident happening, but do remember like waking up and being conscious and a little bit of what happened afterwards, and then was pretty much in the hospital. But that was that experience definitely changed the entire shape of where my life went and my career went after that. And I, like, one of the things that's the most painful probably for me to talk about or even mention is that the drummer of the band, China, who also played in Shonen Knife at the time, was a very dear friend of mine and such an inspiration to me as a woman and as a musician. She unfortunately passed away in that accident. And that was really hard because even though I wasn't driving, I was in the passenger seat. When you're tour managing and taking care of a band, you ultimately feel very responsible for the well-being of everyone. And it was, and I was 22 at the time too. And it was, it was a very like traumatic thing. And then besides, like the loss of China, I was the second person in the car that sustained the most injuries. And, I broke my back and my neck and had like a huge scalp laceration. I think I shattered, like my T4 to T11 vertebrae and a bunch of other things had gone on too. And so I was helicoptered to a hospital in Delaware. But I mean, all of these, like this whole experience, was something that it took me a long time to recover from. And through multiple surgeries, I was, able to have a 100% full recovery, which is amazing. Very similar to, Jonathan. And, but a lot of different people in my life kind of came together at that period of time and helped, because I also, similar to Jonathan, didn't have health insurance.
Right.
And, like and a lot of people that I still work with to this day pulled together. And, like Tom, the manager of Blowfly, was the first person to find out that we had been in the accident because he'd been calling my phone every day on tour. And he happened to call my phone that day, and a paramedic was trying to turn my phone off, but actually turned it on. And
oh my gosh.
He overheard that there was something going on and contacted South by Southwest because he knew that I worked with them a lot and with this band DMBQ. And then they looked up online where we were supposed to go and then contacted Todd P because that's where we were supposed to be that night.
Right.
And then Todd P contacted Shellshag, who are old friends of mine and who were supposed to be playing that show. And, through like this community of people connecting the dots of how to get to the right chain of person to who would be like the most responsible for like us personally, like it went through like this community of people that I worked with in music. And then the right people were brought, the attention of this accident was brought to, their attention. And we were, and then friends of ours came, Shellshag and a couple other people came to meet the band and I where we were in Delaware.
Because you were still living in San Francisco at the time, right?
Yeah, I was pretty much, what's crazy is I was on tour with them from San Francisco through the South all the way to New York. But then this happened on the way to New York on the New Jersey Turnpike. So that night I was supposed to get out of the van and be done with the tour. Someone else, my friend Jeff, was supposed to jump in the van and be on the tour in my place. So it was insane for so many reasons. And, and then, I had a long period of recovery, physical therapy afterwards. But, a lot of, like you have these things that happen in your life that are kind of like these milestones, either good or bad. And definitely like my life after that was kind of like after the accident, this is like what happened. And, and like that was a huge ripple in my timeline. But a lot of what I do now is, I think, directly related to the experiences I went through in that accident. And I think when you've, I was almost paralyzed and, and had almost died and had lost a friend and went through a lot of other significant things at that time.
Yeah.
I, kind of felt like I'd been given this second chance. And once you go through something that traumatic and, like also that is so dangerous to losing your life, you kind of have a different perspective or frame of mind or reference for, what really matters and the people around you and how much they all matter and stuff. And so, the music industry can be so petty and silly and like dramatic, but once you go through something like that, you kind of you take things more seriously, but then you also don't take things as seriously.
Right.
Where you don't have you're not as easily ruffled by things. And, and you kind of have, I had a better appreciation about life and the people around me And that kind of definitely inspired me to kind of work harder and live each day, to its fullest. And at that time I was still doing the magazine, which it had grown from 400 copies being distributed to 40,000 copies.
Yeah, it was still a big part of your life, right?
Yeah, I mean, and that was something that was very physical, distributing 40,000 copies. I think it was literally 2,000 pounds, like a ton of printed matter. And so when I was in that accident, I decided as I was recovering that I would dial back and stop doing the magazine and do full-time booking. And I had a series of conversations with all the artists I work with, being like, I can do this still. And because I could work, while I was recovering, I could work from a computer still. And I was fortunately like mentally very sound, and so I just started doing booking full time. And then this was when I still lived in San Francisco, but a couple years later I moved to New York and then only really did booking except for one issue of Panache. But I learned a lot about how people can really help each other. And so many people pulled together and organized benefits on behalf of the band and I, and like we really needed that help since none of us had like insurance, or I didn't have health insurance and had a crazy amount of medical bills. And so I learned a lot about the power of like a community of people pulling together can really impact you in a positive way.
Yeah.
And, and a lot of the people that helped me out or organized benefits, I still work with to this day, or I'm still friends with. And, it was something that I wish had never happened, but it definitely has changed my life in a lot of positive ways.
Yeah, I mean,
I think changed perspective in a lot of positive ways, where you just have to. I think sometimes when things are thrown at you in that way, you have to, draw strength from them.
Yeah, and if you the loss of someone so close to you that changes you forever. It changes a certain element of your personality in many different ways, but also when you are in the hospital after major trauma and you leave the hospital, you re-enter the world a different person. I mean, I went through my own hospital trauma, and where I was in the hospital for 3 weeks, and then from there, when my kidneys failed, and then that was extremely traumatic. And I was on tour with a band when it happened as well. And then I lost a year of my life, until I had a transplant. But now it's like, that was 2014. Now as we enter a new year, I look back and it's like the timeline of my life somehow is a period of it has been snipped out. So I feel like I just started as a different person after that, and for a lot of different reasons. And you're more, I think we're both pretty resilient people, as is Jonathan, to be able to just kind of to get back into it after a period of time,
Well, I think a lot of people, when I was going through the accident, and a lot of other personal things happened too. Like I lost another person in my life in that same 2-week period. Someone else had passed away in my life from Humboldt, and I think people say things happen to you in like 3 bad things happen to you in 3s, but like 3 very significant. I lost 2 different people and went through this crazy physical devastation and had to recover from it. But a lot of people were like, why are you not mad? How are you not so angry at everything? And of course I was frustrated and angry and sad and devastated about the loss of, not just China, but another person in my life.
Which was right after.
Yeah, and took, so much healing, and is still, something that I think about all the time.
Right.
But being someone who I think naturally, or you learn that you're resilient, where you like that physical need to get better and to heal, kind of really empowered me to kind of move forward. And I knew it could have been worse. I could have been paralyzed, and I just kind of took that knowledge, and it inspired me to actually move forward and progress and fight to be even healthier than I was before, and and just stay inspired, and also that the love of everyone around me really encouraged me to get better. And then it's like I pulled strength from it that I still think is present to this day. I mean, you do become a different person, and you have a different perspective on life. And I think I became a stronger person that, like also I think grew in tremendous spiritual ways from
Absolutely.
it that I think impact my work every day. And, I'm glad I have those attributes in me now in a much intenser way for how I can apply that to like my interactions with the bands I work with or the people in my life and family.
Yeah.
And whatnot. And I learned, and then I think the way this kind of relates to Jonathan's accident too is that when me and you found out about what had happened to Jonathan, I had all these flashbacks of like how things could have been handled slightly differently in my accident, as like, like the way information is spread, because the last thing you want to do when you look online is to find out that someone you're very close to was in an accident. Like, so I was trying to make sure that the right people that Jonathan was really close to got all the right information before finding out about it online. And then also the proper ways of like, or the better ways of trying to handle organizing benefits and having it go through one source rather than, and when I was in my accident, I was so grateful that so many people had raised money, but it had gone from PayPal account to PayPal account, and PayPal kept taking these huge percentages. Right. And I was trying to, with Jonathan, to have it be more organized and also like have everything be collected in a safe way so that it actually got directly to Jonathan in the cheapest, most efficient way. But, and a lot of just like managing a huge group of people that want to have updates of what's going on and just trying to have it be as like, sensitive and like organized and like helpful as possible was like, there was just a lot of things that I learned from my personal experience with my accident, which at the time of Jonathan's accident was like 5 years before, I think, or so, but like, and then apply that to being, kind of the main person that was organizing what was going on around Jonathan.
Yes, definitely.
And, and I think, that relates to a lot of what, I think me and you have done and Jonathan has done too, where you in this industry, there are so many things that are thrown at you and you kind of learn how to deal with like crises and disasters, and a lot of that knowledge and the skills you develop can be applied in so many different ways, like to organize festivals or events or, like organize benefits that really do like impact like someone's recovery. Like if I don't know what I would have done if people hadn't organized like all these benefits. And the same thing for Jonathan. And you do like the collective power of everyone working together really does change the outcome for somebody else. And it, and so I was glad that another good thing had come from my accident where I could help influence and help, like pull together the united force for, Jonathan's well-being. Yeah,
those things they're just critical in times of when people are scrambling and confused and in shock. I don't think I could, me and a couple friends did a big thing for the Yellow Dogs when that happened, and I think having done the thing at Brooklyn Bowl for Jonathan, I wouldn't have been able to do the same thing. It hadn't it been I learned those things from him and you to help Yellow Dogs out, and that was another really emotional and intense benefit too, which is its own story, of course, in its own right. But I know that you have been, in recent years, even since before you moved to LA, which now you're based in LA, and you're on to yet another new exciting chapter in your life. You've been doing like a lot of sort of benefit style fundraisers and philanthropic style events. And one, now, you might have to teach me a little bit on some of the ones that you've been doing, but I did want to talk about this too, because I think it does, matter to cover this, especially the Planned Parenthood stuff, because in lieu of recent events too, that's becoming more and more essential. But you've been doing Planned Parenthood fundraiser benefit concerts for the last few years, right? Like, what's the story with that, and what have you been? Give me a rundown of that really quick.
So yes, you're right. Jonathan Tobin and I have been organizing Planned Parenthood benefits for Planned Parenthood of New York City for the last like 5 years. So kind of actually probably about a year after Jonathan's accident. I think being two people that both kind of were really affected and impacted by the communal effort of people organizing funds for us and seeing how it really helped, we really understood that, we could utilize our skills and resources and help make positive change. And we, we had talked for a long time about wanting to do more charity events, and we decided to do one around Valentine's Day. And the organization that made the most sense to both of us was Planned Parenthood. For me personally, it's, as a woman, it's a safe place, or like a place that you could go to regardless of what city you're in, like what your financial bracket is, like how old you are, and get the kind of like healthcare and also like information you need. And like, especially growing up in a very small town of Eureka, which we talked about, like,
right.
I feel like in most towns and cities across the country, a lot of them have been shut down, but especially at this time, that like when I was growing up, Planned Parenthoods was the one place you knew to go to. Like now, like with healthcare, if you need to go see a doctor, a dermatologist, or a dentist, it's so scary trying to figure out who to go to and stuff.
Totally.
But like Planned Parenthood was like an organization that you could go to with no money and like get, any sort of like, STD screening, or like, pre-cancer screening, and like, physicals, and, birth control. And I think the fact that an organization like that is at such risk, then and even more so now, and it was such a safe haven, or a place that I knew I could go to get the answers, I needed, and all my friends needed too, as, you're evolving into being from like a teenage girl into a woman. Like it made sense to me that this is a charity that we should try to help. And doing it around Valentine's Day, it was just a fun way that we could try to tie in like the idea of like, romance, love, sex, and, helping an organization that I think was so influential to me and, and to Jonathan, and that needed our help. And so we started organizing these events, these benefit shows for Planned Parenthood, like around 5 years ago, where at first it started out as like a dance, and we did them at Union Pool in Brooklyn for a couple years. And a lot of the other aspects of my life came into play, of like elements from the Bruise Cruise, where we brought in like the dating game aspect and did a dating game on Valentine's Day. It was funny, we did a 2-room party where there was a room for singles, and then if you're single, you go into this room and then you pair up, you find a partner, and then there's a, like the date room that you could go into. And we had dance cards, we had fun with it. But then, and we'd have a raffle where all the proceeds from the raffle would go towards Planned Parenthood. And at first it started out really small, where, like it was like maybe 100 or 200 people there. We raised like $1,000 the first couple of times. And it took a lot of work, but it all felt really good because, we were doing it for a good cause. And everyone around us also wanted to help. And so they felt like they were, contributing. And Valentine's Day is such a strange holiday where a lot of people, whether or not you're in a relationship or alone, you don't really know what you want to do in that day, or you kind of end up doing nothing. And this is just a great way to go somewhere and be amongst friends or peers and do something positive, and, like walk away happy from, like kind of like a strange holiday. So we always kind of stuck with Valentine's Day, and then would do benefits for Planned Parenthood throughout the year too. But Valentine's Day kind of became our big focus.
So you got one this coming Valentine's Day, right?
Yeah, we're still doing it. And then a couple years later, we ended up moving the benefits to a larger venue, and we've been doing them at Music Hall of Williamsburg. And now they're a much broader deal, or bigger deal, and we encompass a lot more people and performers. But we started doing this sort of like live performance review series where we have 15 or 20 artists from the town that we're hosting the benefit in. And like, so we had a lot of Brooklyn and New York artists last year, like 15 to 20 different artists that they each played 2 songs, and they either cover their favorite love songs or cover songs. And they perform, we have backline provided. And, and then this way we can reach a much larger, diverse audience by having way more than just 4 bands playing. Rather than having 4 bands on a benefit show, we can have 15 or 20 artists.
Right, like 4 bands playing traditional like half an hour, 45-minute sets or something like that.
Yeah, because the event's still at night. It's not all day long. So,
right.
So when you have 15 or 20 artists only doing 2 or 3 songs each, you can encompass like a much broader, like range of artists. Like you can accommodate them time-wise line. And then, and then we still did we did a raffle where we have like about 100 different local businesses donate prizes, and it could range from like a hotel at, like a hotel in New York, or you might get a gift basket of chocolates, or you might get, like some sort of, we'd have it be like romantic themed or like restaurant themed, but it's kind of like Valentine's Day themed stuff. But there'd be a wide range of prizes you could get, ranging from like $50 to $300, like, and raffle tickets were like $5 each. And then, and then Jonathan would DJ and it'd be a dance party at the end. But so we did, the last one we did in Brooklyn at Music Hall Williamsburg, John Spencer played as Boss Hogg, Mac DeMarco played, Kevin Morby played, Cassie Ramone played, Kid Congo, Jonathan Tobin. And, I hosted it, and we raised $10,000, which was a good number to reach because the folks at the Planned Parenthood NYC told us that actual amount provides free healthcare in all of the 5 boroughs in New York for a full day.
That's amazing.
And I feel like when you're organizing benefits...
Amazing.
Yeah, it was amazing, and it was so great to be able to give someone an actual tangible way that we're helping people, because I feel like when anyone donates money or you go to a benefit or you organize a benefit, it really helps to be able to like visualize how you're helping people.
Right.
And that was, that was just so brilliant that many people had come out. Like, we sold the place out. And so this year, Panache is doing 3 Planned Parenthood benefits, one in LA at the Terra Grand Ballroom on February 14th. And on that same day, Valentine's Day, we're doing one in Brooklyn at Music Hall Williamsburg. And then we're also doing one in Memphis on February 10th at a venue called Murphy's. And hopefully my goal is, and they're all benefiting the Planned Parenthoods of those cities. So the Memphis Planned Parenthood will get the proceeds, LA Planned Parenthood will get the proceeds, et cetera.
Okay.
And we're working with those, in conjunction with those Planned Parenthoods for better outreach. Like at the last one in New York, speakers from Planned Parenthood came and they tabled and gave away like condoms and dental dams and other fun stuff, and also like spoke up about what Planned Parenthood is and other services that they do that you might not even know about. And my goal with them specifically as a charity is to try to, especially on Valentine's Day, but throughout the year, do more benefits on a broader scale, because it's the one in LA. Some amazing artists are performing, and
who do you got? Have you announced the lineup?
We haven't announced it yet, but by the time this podcast is being announced, it'll be announced. But Ty Siegel's doing it. Kevin Morby's doing it again. Let's see. We have King Tuff, Michael Cronin, Shannon Lay from Feels, Gal Pals, and a lot of amazing artists and others to come.
Sweet.
But but that was that because I know so many musicians and people that kind of have, this generous spirit of giving, it was really easy to put together a lineup. And the fact that I could try to do this on a much more national level or global level, hopefully in the future, with not just Planned Parenthood or other organizations, with the help of other people, is something that I definitely see, happening more and more throughout 2017 and in the future. And another thing I know we had talked about earlier off the record, is that another band I work with, the OCs, has been organizing benefits around the holidays for homeless shelters.
Oh, cool.
And John from the OCs has always done that in the Bay Area because he lived there, but now he lives in LA as well, which is where I reside. And so last year we organized 2 benefits with the OCs, Wand and Fuzz, and organized, I think, about $30,000 for LA Kitchen, an amazing business that helps homeless people and also does preventative work to kind of keep people off the streets and targeting the next people in line to be homeless and stopping that from happening, which is amazing. And we did a big sock drive too, where I think we got like over 2,000 socks.
That's dope.
Together. And anyways, we're doing 2 more benefits in January in LA for LA Kitchen and then for another charity. And I just really think in wake of a lot of stuff that's going on in this country, that people will be a lot more proactive and kind of take the reins themselves and organize events like this. And
yeah, you're seeing that a little bit more and more.
Yeah, I'm seeing a ton of benefits for like Planned Parenthood, ACLU, and a lot of different organizations that really need help right now. And I think as long as everyone kind of like stays inspired to keep doing this, even after the holidays, we can really inspire positive change and impact, like the world in a positive way. And also when one person does something, it kind of hopefully like encourages someone else to do something on that level, even if it's on a smaller or larger level. And it's great to kind of take all the knowledge and experience and assets I have from working in the music industry for like 18 years and apply it in a really broad, positive way.
That's the way to do it. That's the right way to do it.
Yeah, and it helps, make the world way more fulfilling.
So, how is living in LA now compared to New York? Like, what is that transition to moving to LA? Because just recently you closed the office here in New York, in Brooklyn, which you had since you moved here. I mean, since it's for 10 years, talk about that, please. I'm so curious.
Well, I love LA. I mean, I love New York too, but I'm sitting in, New York now, closing down you're listening to this in the future, but I recently shut down an office that I had for 8 years after living in New York for 10 years, and which is very sad, but at the same time, like it's kind of a nice rite of passage. And we have an office in LA now, and potentially we'll probably have an office in New York again. But I'm in New York right now, and it's snowing outside and wet and cold, and the very opposite of LA, where it's kind of perpetually sunny and 60 or 70 degrees, and you can wear a bikini in the winter. But LA's good because I think there's a different pace out there. There's definitely a different quality of life.
Do you get more done in LA or less? Do you get more done in New York or do you get more done in LA? I ask myself that every single time I travel to Los Angeles for work.
I think it's about equal for me because I work a lot. I mean, anyone that knows me, I think has called me like kind of like this gypsy of a agent where I'm kind of everywhere and anywhere. And
yeah, you travel a lot.
And online at all times, or responding to people's emails or texts at all times. But so regardless of where I'm at, I think I get probably the same amount of work done. But when it comes to actual like personal like enjoyment of life and spiritual work on myself, like not to sound all like hippie and get all zen, but I think LA is really giving me that opportunity to kind of have more time to enjoy the space around me. And, in LA, it's, I have a beautiful house, a nice, lovely backyard, and you're really close. You've stayed there before.
It's lovely.
And, and I think just the fact of the sun always being out, and it's just not as, weather-wise, it's just not as brutal as New York. But I feel like New York really conditions you, and living in New York for 10 years really, like, completely, like, sculpted me into being such a hardworking, and like really assertive person. And I think if I hadn't ever moved to New York, where I am now would be completely different, and like, but I think I needed that schooling and conditioning from New York to kind of like set the playing field for where I went. And now I'm definitely getting to enjoy life a little more in LA. I mean, I'm still going to be in New York all the time for work, but
you travel a great deal.
Yeah, I travel all the time. I'm not even in LA that often, but I travel all over the world. I was just in Argentina and Australia in the last month, but I definitely find myself way more at ease and calm and relaxed, I think, in LA, which is probably just because you're a little more in nature, and I think everyone else around you is kind of doing more calm activities, going hiking or going surfing in the morning and stuff. And when you're surrounded by a group of people that are taking time out for themselves, as opposed to, I feel like in New York, people are always working. You
got a good workout regimen though, or you work out in the morning? Like you like get up at 5 o'clock and work out though, right? Like
my day in LA is pretty interesting because working in LA versus New York is a little difficult because you have to wake up earlier because New York's 3 hours ahead of you. So even if you got up at, when you wake up at 7 and start working, it's already 10 a.m. in New York.
Tell me about it.
And because I do management stuff working with people in Europe, it's 6 hours or 5 hours later there too. So I get up at like 7 a.m. every day, clear my inbox. And then I've been running 6 miles a day around Eagle Rock and Highland Park and Occidental College. And then I get back to the computer, go to the office, and work the full day. I mean, what's great about living in LA is because it's 3 hours earlier, you get to clock out a little earlier. So there's so many days that I've worked 12 or 14-hour days, in New York or LA, but in LA it's a little easier to clock out actually at 6 o'clock because it's 9 o'clock in New York and people are asleep in Europe.
Do you have an all-female staff?
Not intentionally, but right now I actually do have an all-female staff.
That's amazing.
The ladies of Panache, who are all amazing.
Yeah, you have great agents.
Yeah.
So
shout out to Meredith and Anna and Sarah.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And Annie.
And Annie, of course. Great folks. Maybe you can hire me. I'm kidding. No, I'm kidding.
Come to LA and work out in the sun and work out in our beautiful office in LA.
So, what's up with? So you work with Mac DeMarco as well now, and we're almost at the finish line now of this epic interview, which I really appreciate, by the way.
Thank you. I've been enjoying it.
Thank you. See, this is like Nardwuar ain't got shit on this, right?
I love telling my life story. Where are my gifts? Nardwuar would have brought gifts.
I know. You've worked with Nardwuar a bunch, right?
Oh yeah, I've known Nardwuar a long time.
Is he cool?
He's amazing. He gave me my favorite merch item. He had one of those floaty pens that you might have seen if you're a fan of Nardwuar, but he gave it to me on the street at South by Southwest. But pretty much, it's a pen that when you flip it, Nardwuar's in it, but when you flip it to one direction, his pants come off.
Cute.
Really cute.
You met Mark Maron?
I've not met Mark Maron.
But he lives somewhere near you.
He lives really close to me in Highland Park.
You met Richard Simmons, though. You worked with Richard Simmons before, right?
I've never worked with Richard Simmons, but I did run into him in an airport after Mardi Gras in New Orleans at 5 a.m. And it was really hilarious because I didn't recognize him at first, but then kind of realized like, oh, wait, this guy in this baby blue like workout outfit, everyone's stopping and talking to him. But he stopped me while we were going through security together and told me I had the eyes of an old soul. And
amazing.
And said it looked like I'd lived through a lot. And which
is true.
Which is true. And eventually kissed my cheek and said some other really nice things to me. But yeah, he had just been on the Ellen DeGeneres show, I believe, and had done a taping. But yeah, that was a really weird encounter in the New Orleans airport.
What? So tell me a little bit about Mac, because I remember working at Panache when we sort of collectively discovered his first solo stuff after Makeout Club.
Makeout Videotape?
Makeout Videotape was his first band, right?
Yeah, so I met Mac after he was doing Makeout Videotape, but I had, and I have a lot of different people that have come in and out of the office, but my friend Drew was sort of like interning. He grew up in Canada, but he was interning
He's from Calgary.
Yeah, he was interning in the Panache Brooklyn office, and various people would play music in the office, and he ended up playing this guy named Mac DeMarco over and over and over again. And I think for the next 2 or 3 months, all he would play was like old Makeout Videotape stuff and then Mac stuff that hadn't been released.
Yeah, it was just on Bandcamp at the time.
Yeah, what he was playing a lot of was Rock and Roll Nightclub,
right,
which had not been released yet. And I was really taken by, this guy's songs and asked Drew to introduce me. And so I ended up talking to Mac on the phone. And it was before he had a label, and it was as he was starting to talk to his label, Capture Tracks, too. But we ended up having a very strange conversation where at the end of the conversation, I didn't really know if I would be working with him or not. And, the rest is history, though. We ended up working together the next month, and kind of similar to how Ty has changed my life, working with Mac, collectively we've changed each other's lives. Yeah,
you guys have you've done so many cool collaborative things with both artists, and it's been interesting to see, like, especially, Mac has had an interesting trajectory too, because it's, as there's a lot of different groups that have made sort of music in the same world as him that haven't had the growth and the kind of evolution as a touring act, and being sort of embraced by pop culture, which seemed very unexpected when we were sitting around listening to Rock and Roll Vegas, or what was that?
Rock and Roll Nightclub.
Rock and Roll Nightclub, and then the other one was there was the Vegas song, and then Babies Wearing Blue Jeans.
Babies Wearing Blue Jeans.
Just his original demo tape with the pitch down vocals and stuff like that,
Yeah, Matt kind of sounds like Elvis.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. I should have Anyway, but please do what does he have going on for 2017? Just really quickly before we wrap this up here on the House List with Michelle Cable.
Well, Mac, I mean, yeah, I started working with Mac really early on in his solo career. I mean, before, right when he was signing to a label, and it was really interesting because he was, just kind of getting started, actually kind of really aggressively touring the US, and the band, when I first saw them, didn't even know the songs. They were learning the songs as they toured.
Right.
And he had kind of decided that instead of flying to a festival in Portland and then flying to CMJ right before 2 came out, that he wanted to tour around and do it. And so in a very last minute natured way, we decided to book I think it was a 6-week tour in the teeniest, weirdest markets, and some bigger markets. But, I booked a tour for Mac where the band pretty much learned all the songs on 2, his debut album on captured tracks.
Right.
And they learned them on the road. And, those were some kind of ridiculous shows and really zany shows where they were just kind of getting their chops together. And then by the time they got to New York around CMJ in October of that year, the album was getting reviewed. It had gotten Best New Music on Pitchfork, and the band had kind of come into their own. And so they started playing in front of much larger audiences than they'd been playing on tour. And that was kind of this magical moment where it was kind of okay, the charm and brilliance I'd seen in Mac, even though the shows were so loose, kind of, was still shining through even all these tiny little grungy venues. But then it was at that moment, right around that time that the record was coming out, and they'd kind of unified as a band, where it was kind of okay, wow, there's some magic happening here. And then they went back to Canada and didn't tour for several months. And the first next show they had back was actually opening up for Ty at Webster Hall,
right,
with X-Cult. And then after that, and that show was amazing. And, and it was great to have 2 people that I care about so much and, have both been very influential on the Panache roster, play a show together. And then at that time when he came down here, Mac had asked me we had decided to start working together in a management way. And that definitely changed the arc of my life as a manager and, and as an agent. But then he went to South by Southwest and kind of quickly at that moment grew, and exponentially it's the trajectory of Mac has been very impressive.
What's been his biggest headline play, ticketed headline play?
His biggest ticketed headline play to date has been the Greek Theater, which was this past May of 2016, where, we had one of our mutual idols, Jonathan Richman, open up for him.
Which is amazing. You've been a fan of his forever.
Yeah, I think Jonathan Richman, someone once asked me who I've seen the most, separate from anyone I work with, because I've seen people I work with hundreds and hundreds of times. And the musician that I've seen the most is Jonathan Richman. And we interviewed him in Panache too, years and years ago. And I love Jonathan Richman. But for Mac and I to have Jonathan Richman on this show, with 6,000 people or so at it, was just so magical and I don't know, a childhood dream. And it was, it was great. But Mac has a lot of big stuff. I mean, in 2017, we'll be announcing a lot of stuff.
Cool.
That you'll be finding out about. And, but it's been really crazy to see him have this really universal appeal. I went to South America with him to Brazil for 10 days, and, he played sold out crowds. People were singing every lyric of his, and
how does he like it? Is he stoked?
Oh, he's having a good time still, which is the best part. Everyone I work with, they want to have a good time as they grow.
There's a period of time when you stop having a good time and you start having a bad time, and you can still be successful. Well,
that period of time doesn't have to happen for everyone, and I feel true to my artists, or my hope is to help them have a great, amazing time and experience as their career grows. And I think with Mac, and he's talked a lot about this in interviews, he only wants to be doing this if he's enjoying life.
Sure.
And everyone in his band is enjoying life. And he genuinely really appreciates everyone around him and his fans especially. And that's why I feel like he has this universal appeal where I've been with him in Australia and and South America and Europe and Canada and Mexico, and he's toured all over Asia, and will go many other insane places. But I think this, regardless of that language barrier, there's this connection that is there because of Mac's like personality and like sincerity that is really inspiring to be part of.
Yeah, well, you've always had a good eye for personalities, that's for sure. If anything, Panache has been like a university of unique personalities. So I am just so proud of you, and I'm so happy that you gave me all this time. You know, it's going to be an epic two-parter. So I love you, and I'm proud of you, and thank you for doing this, Michelle.
I love you too, Peter, and thank you for being such a big integral part of the whole, legacy of what Panache was and is.
Absolutely. If anyone has an opportunity to see those magazines or go to any of Michelle's various fundraiser type stuff, I would definitely recommend supporting that. Thanks, Michelle.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Thank you, Michelle. That was a great conversation. Great talk from a booking agent, a very busy booking agent, as most are. So I appreciate her taking the time, letting me come by and do a couple days of talks. Booking agents are kind of tough to lock down. So this is definitely a special episode. I hope you enjoyed it. And I hope that you feel inclined to subscribe. And if anything, if you like this or go back to any of the other previous episodes, tell a friend to tell a friend. It's a DIY thing, you know what I'm saying? It's not I don't have a big push here. So let's do this word of mouth style. I feel like that's totally underrated in 2017. So if you dig it, send it, text it to a friend or email it to a friend, or if you're out and about and you say, oh yeah, you're talking about something. Hey, y'all hear about that podcast, The House List? Peter Agostin's podcast, The House List. Have you heard about it? That's all I ask. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. This episode was edited and engineered by my man CJ Stewart out in McKinleyville, California. Opening theme produced and written by Dame Funky Keith Ede. My name is Peter Agostin. I'm the host. You can subscribe to this on iTunes, The HouseListPodcast. It's also on SoundCloud and Stitcher. I am on Twitter, if you can believe that. Be my 50th follower, why don't you? At TheHouseListPod. I should have a website up soon. Have a happy 2017, y'all. Let's see what we can do and where we will go. Be safe and be kind to one another if you can. And listen, I appreciate you guys. If you're taking the time to listen to these, you got to know I appreciate it. It's not like we're running into each other and I can verbalize that to you face to face. If you ever see me out on the street and you checked it out, tell me what's up so I can shake your hand and thank you in person, because I genuinely do appreciate it. So hopefully we'll have some great episodes. In fact, I'm quite confident that we'll have some very good to great episodes of The House List coming to you once a week, if not twice. So keep checking back. And until then, take care, be good, and I'll catch you next week. All right, y'all.